Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy247 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast.
Welcome into Vandy 24/7 live on the Believe Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick. Got a special guest today, Joe Healy from D1Baseball.com, SEC Extra as well. One of the go-to guys, especially when it comes to SEC baseball. We'll preview this weekend series between Vandy and Oklahoma. We'll go around the league a little bit, talk about what's going on at the top of the league, where Vanderbilt stands in the pecking order, and what is another dominant year in the SEC relative to the rest of the country, but also very competitive within the league. So we'll talk all things SEC baseball, specifically the Commodores with Joe coming up. Do want to mention our baseball sponsor. All of our coverage brought to you by Sanders Moving, leaders among moving companies here in Nashville and the surrounding area. Their team of professional movers are focused on delivering efficient, hassle-free moving at an affordable price. Whether you're moving across town or across the country, Sanders Moving has you covered. Visit them at tedrsandersmoving.com. All right, let's hop into it with Mr. Joe Healy. Joe, good morning. How you doing?
Morning, Billy. Good to see you. Getting into the meat of the SEC schedule, if you will. So getting excited for the postseason to come, but a lot of baseball to be played until then.
Yeah, it feels like this part of the season's already flown by. We're already almost to the halfway point. Joe, I wanted to bring you on here to not only talk about the series, go around the SEC, but starting with the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma, we've seen them in Omaha, especially in the National Championship Series against Ole Miss a couple of years back. But for Vanderbilt, and again, I didn't do my homework here, should have researched this. I don't think they've ever played in Norman, but I don't even know if they've ever played in general. But you look at this Oklahoma team, number 19 in the country, number 18 in the RPI. Solid group, great pitching. Vandy's going to see a really good arm on Friday night. What can we expect to see, not just Friday night, we know that's going to be good, but the rest of the weekend from the Oklahoma Sooners?
It's a little bit of the Spider-Man meme of them pointing at each other, right? Like these two teams are built fairly similarly. They want to win in similar ways. They're both pitching-oriented outfits, at least as currently constructed. And you're right, with Kyson Witherspoon on the mound, that's the thing for Oklahoma that's so important for them. It's a little bit different than Vanderbilt. I feel like Vanderbilt probably has more depth and more guys they trust, rotation and bullpen both. Oklahoma's a little more reliant on, we need to win Kyson Witherspoon's starts. So they tend to push their chips in to make sure they get the Friday games with Kyson on the mound, which they haven't had as much success doing in SEC play. The thing about their offense, though, is that it is really predicated on making things happen on the bases. They are probably the SEC team that I most associate with, hey, we're gonna try to put pressure on defenses. It kind of reminds me of Kentucky 2 years ago. Not so much Kentucky last year because they started actually hitting for more power, but Kentucky 2 years ago, where if they're not forcing the defense into miscues, if they're not bunting for hits, if they're not stealing bases, the offense gets stagnant. In SEC play, they are tied for 15th, which also means tied for last, as it turns out, in average at 231. They don't really have a ton of power. They have about as many home runs as Vanderbilt. It's 12 or 13 in SEC play. So it's a kind of deal where if you can hold their runners, or better yet, just keep people off base for Oklahoma, they're not gonna 3-run homer you to death. So these teams, I think, are going to try to win in similar ways. And it feels like a coin flip series, Billy, where like either of these teams, if you told me, hey, that they end up hosting as like, a 12 to 16 seed, something like that, I'd totally believe you. But if you told me, hey, they need to win some games in Hoover to feel good about getting into the tournament, I also believe that, especially on the Oklahoma side. I'm a little more bought in on Vanderbilt now than I am Oklahoma, but they do feel like teams in a similar place. And with it being a road series, obviously, it ratchets the difficulty up a little bit for the Commodores.
This has 3-2, 5-4, and 3-1 written all over it this weekend. Some people like watching that. That's not the norm, but I do want to touch on this a little bit later. Can that still win in today's day and age in baseball? I want to table that, but I do have my answer. Vandy has played Oklahoma in baseball. They faced each other in 2008. Oklahoma won 11-10, but I think the record is tied at 2-2. So they haven't faced each other a ton. But Joe, for this Vanderbilt team, you said you are a little bit more bought in on them, and I would imagine the sweeps play into that. Sweeping Texas A&M, and again sweeping Florida last weekend. A&M now all of a sudden is a team. Like Vanderbilt sweeps them, then they go to Knoxville and put up 26 runs on Tennessee. And this past weekend, we'll see what happens with Florida, but they very well could get hot as well. I don't know if it's too little too late for them, but how are you looking at those two sweeps and what Vanderbilt has done so far?
Yeah, even if those teams don't end up being any good, A&M and Florida, I think it's important that Vanderbilt swept them. Like, it feels to me like that's not something some Vanderbilt teams, or even, just some decent SEC teams do very well. That they'll get 2 out of 3 and end up being happy with that. But the sweeps really do change your math when it comes to your SEC record. It can help offset, the inevitable just nightmare weekend where nothing goes right. It can help offset the fact that, hey, you're just going to face teams that you have no chance of beating because they're just, on another planet in terms of being hot. So that's regardless of how good those teams end up being. Just getting sweeps in SEC play, you don't take any of those for granted. So there's that. And I do think that is a positive sign for Vanderbilt, that it feels to me, you'd know better than I, but it feels to me like they're not playing with their food as much. The teams they should beat, they're just beating.
Yeah.
A little bit better this year than in the past. So now, to your point you made, like they're not beating SEC teams 12-2 because they just don't have that kind of offense, but they are taking care of business. That being said, I'm more interested in the A&M side of it versus Florida. I think Florida is just too hurt to make a run. I really do. And it brings me no pleasure to say that, but Pierce Capola's been out for a long time in the rotation. Liam Peterson's missed a couple of outings. Cade Curlin, Kyle Jones out for the year. Their best freshman arm was out before the season started. Like, there's so much less of the version of themselves than we thought they would be. A&M's a little different deal, though. They are getting a little healthier. They have hit on some new players, new faces that have helped kind of keep them afloat while they were really struggling. They're clearly not as good as we thought they were going to be. Like, they're not going to get back to being like, number one team in the country kind of stuff, obviously. But this could be a little bit like last year's LSU, where that team got off to a horrific start in SEC play, but by the time they got to a regional, they felt as dangerous as any team in the country. I wouldn't be shocked if that's where we end up with A&M.
Man, it's incredible how these teams are able to turn it around like that. Let's go to Vanderbilt offensively. They bring in Riley Nelson, bring in Mike Mancini. This approach feels different. It's really not statistically a whole lot different, especially in the home run department. But I ask you, Joe, what's the ceiling of this group? Can they continue to win at this level that they're winning? I know they've got a gauntlet coming up with Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, not to mention Oklahoma this weekend. What can they do with the way they're playing offensively this season and the adjustments that they've made? They're still pitching and playing defense well, but has your opinion on what this team's ceiling could be changed?
Maybe moderately, not in any real transformative way, I would say. I still think it's kind of at best, middle of the pack type of lineup, and probably a little less than that. If you want to look for some additional ceiling, and I think this is reasonable, they have had some guys be revelations on this. You talk about Riley Nelson. That's a guy, like the July JUCO signing never ends up being like a super impact guy. So that the coaching staff deserves a lot of credit for finding him, because that's real. Like, when it was 2 weeks, it was like, okay, like maybe he's just, seen a lot of fastballs or whatever. Like, no, he's still raking. Like, that guy is real. But then Birdie Johnson has slowed up because, he still has some things to work on plate discipline wise. But now Jonathan Vastine is swinging the bat well. So he's on the comeback trail a little bit. So I say all that to say, if they get folks hot kind of at the same time, I do think there is some additional ceiling here. That said, it's limited. I think it is limited. Now, the question will be, and it's unanswerable until we get to the postseason, is moderate improvement offensively combined with, I don't want to say significant improvement, but it's a pretty serious improvement on the mound. I like the different pieces. I like the depth. The bullpen is one of the best in the country, I think. Is that enough to get Vanderbilt deeper in the postseason? We'll have to see, but that's ultimately the question they're going to have to answer, is just really going all in and getting better at the stuff they were already good at. Is that good enough to get them to the next level? Because I think that's kind of where they're at.
We had a question yesterday in our mailbag that asked, out of the next six series for Vanderbilt, how many of them do they need to win in order to host a regional? And obviously you could throw sweeps in there, and maybe they don't need to win, maybe they only need to win 3, as long as they get a couple of sweeps. So you can look at it that way. But Oklahoma this weekend, Georgia at home, at Ole Miss, Alabama at home, at Tennessee, and then Kentucky. They're 7-5 right now. What has to happen down the stretch here, Joe, for Vanderbilt? Obviously, there's other stuff that have to happen around them, but for Vanderbilt particularly, what has to happen for them to host a regional?
I think so. Of the final 6 series, I think you got to win at least 2, and you can't get swept. And that's pretty. I hate to keep using this comparison, but this was a team that made a super regional. 2023 Kentucky only won 4 SEC series all season, all regular season. They swept a couple of teams early in the year, and they kind of just rode that wave a little bit. And I can see a similar path here where you just don't get swept by Tennessee in Knoxville, right? You get a game there. You got Georgia in a couple weeks. You got to make sure you get a game there. But Ole Miss is a winnable series. Obviously, Oklahoma is a winnable series. Alabama is a winnable series. Kentucky at home to end the regular season is probably one you should win. You need to win. There's definitely a path there. If you told me they won 4 of those series, I'd also believe you. I'd have a hard time imagining winning the series in Knoxville. But really, everything but that, they got at least a puncher's chance there. So at a bare minimum, you got to win 2. That puts you kind of on that path. But if you win 3, I think you're in really good shape, because that means at a bare minimum, you're sitting at 13 SEC wins. You only need to find 2 or 3 more the rest of the way. So it's there. Like I said, if you really force me to give me a prediction on where they finish, I think Vanderbilt sneaks in as a 15-16 host is kind of where I see it, because I do think they've got enough to take care of some of these teams that they feel like they should beat, because the pitching has been really, really good. But they just have a ceiling, right? So that's kind of my thought, is this team feels like a 15-16 host.
All right, I got a couple more, and I want to ask this one. Do you think, in college basketball, I've heard people talk about a potential course correction with, the portal, where maybe, you're seeing older coaches like a Rick Barnes, for example, really compete in the portal and just get after it. Whereas older guys like Coach K or even Jay Wright, who wasn't all that old, got out and just, he was done with it, right? In baseball, do you think there will be a calming of the waters eventually, whether it's portal, but also just style of play? Do you think it continues to be hitting the ball out of the park, throwing 97 miles an hour? That's what wins. That's what you got to do. And we've seen teams, you mentioned Kentucky last year, they got to Omaha, that didn't win it. But do you think that will change, or is that still where we're going, shooting up like a rocket ship, and that's the style of play?
Well, yeah, there's a couple things here. I think in terms of style of play, I do think there will be a shift back, but I'm not predicting that in the next 2 to 3 years, because I think we just need to reach a critical mass. And I'm not sure what the precipitating event would need to be to kind of change the style of play. Unfortunately, it truly brings me no pleasure to say this. I fear what it's going to be is somebody gets hurt by getting hit with a line drive that came off the bat at 120, right? I hope that's not the case, but it wouldn't shock me if that's what it ends up coming to, because ultimately it does become a safety issue on some point. I don't care how athletic and quick your reflexes are. If you got 120 coming right back at you, there's not a lot you can do. So I do think we'll have to take a look at it. I don't know what the answers are. It's funny. My friend, Mike Farron, who works some ESPN games, play-by-play, works for the Diamondbacks too. He had on a guy with the company that makes the torpedo bats in MLB. And that's obviously been a big topic of conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a bat design scientist, so I can't explain it exactly, but he said that basically the concept of the torpedo bats has been in play in the college bats for a little while, because you can manipulate composite. you can manipulate composite in a way that you can't a wood bat. Like the wood is just the wood, right? You can shave it down and but you're not allowed to, cut a giant hole in it to move the weight around. You just can't do that. That's why it's shaped so funny, the torpedo bat. But with composite, metal, essentially, like you can manipulate things in it. And so the guest Mike Farron had on his show for Sirius XM said as much, that, yeah, that's part of it. Now, the bats still have to go through safety testing. They can't put a bat out there that's getting average exit velos of 100, average of 110. Like that's just not going to fly. So there are still some checks and balances in place, but I do think what we are seeing is the average exit velo come up, and so people are more consistently hitting those high end exit velos, even if they don't meet past the standard of what's too hot, if you will. So, or maybe it's arm injuries. I don't know if there's some definitive, I know we kind of think we know that throwing 97 for 100 pitches a game is what causes Tommy John. I think we know that, but if there's some sort of definitive proof that really gets accepted by the baseball community, maybe that would change some things too. But I think, for better or worse, and I really don't know where I fall on this, I think we're going to be dealing with kind of this status quo for at least another several years until there's some precipitating event that forces us to, maybe it's another 21-14 College World Series final like they had in 1999. USC wins it, or maybe it's Miami, whatever it was. 21-14 was the final score. So like maybe it takes that. I don't know, but I think we're on this ride for a little bit more, Billy, I think is the answer.
I like that's interesting perspective on the bats, the college bats. I don't think there's that there's a ton of people that knew that. Okay, last thing in the SEC, we got a different top of the league this year. A team like a Texas has come up and played really well. Georgia, of course, after a really good year last year, is really good. Alabama with some star power. We know what LSU has done. Arkansas, Joe, they look unbeatable. I mean, they look really good. And then of course Tennessee maybe a notch down, but still really, really good. How do you look at the top of the league this year? I mean, this is, we talk about the league being really good every year, and it is every year, but I think this could be the best top of the league we've seen in a really long time.
I mean, it might be, because it does seem like at a bare minimum, Arkansas, LSU, Tennessee are clearly, for me anyway, the three best teams in the country. And maybe if you want to make an argument for the ACC, you sneak Florida State or Clemson in there or something. But like, those three teams are really, really, really good, and they do feel like they're a bit of a cut above. And you're right about Arkansas, man. Like, some of this is because they played Missouri, but they're batting in conference play 361. The next highest average in conference play is 299. So they are 62 points higher than any other team in SEC play. Now, again, they played Missouri. That's part of it. But other teams have also played Missouri and don't have an average that high. So, and I think if you're a Vanderbilt fan, by the way, seeing what Arkansas has done year over year offensively should give you some optimism. Now, maybe it just makes you frustrated because Vanderbilt can't change, but I do think it should give you some optimism that, like, if you hit on the right combination of players, like, you can change your offensive outlook real quick in this league. And it's not as if Arkansas brought in they didn't go out and get Andrew Fisher. That guy's at Tennessee. They didn't get Gavin Keelan. He's at Tennessee too. But they got a bunch of guys that are having really good years. The other Aloy brother and Charles Davalon and guys like that who were nice players in the portal, but were by no means the most high profile. They just found guys that know how to hit. And Cam Kojal is also one of those, as he whispers into the microphone. But they've been the most impressive team to me. Texas is probably the most mysterious, because I can acknowledge that right now they should be the number 2 team in the nation. They've earned that. They deserve that. I still don't think they're a national title contender. You look at their stat sheet, and after we get off, listeners, after we finish here, go look at Texas's pitching stat sheet, and it looks weird, because most teams, the list is like this long, and I'm doing hands for those who are listening. Like, Texas's is like this. Like, they basically use 5 guys, and then a couple of others get innings, and that's it. Like, so if they have if one of those guys hits a wall, God forbid, gets injured, whatever it is, I think they might be in trouble. Now, it's a good position player group too, but they're of the teams at the top, they're the one that I think they'll be really good in the regular season, but I just don't see them as being kind of kind of in that same class at the top of the SEC, even if the record suggests that they are. And those are probably famous last words, and they'll get old takes exposed here. But that's how I see it.
It'll be playing in the Texas locker room here eventually. Joe, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Real quick on your way out, tell people where they can find you. I know the Highway to Hoover podcast still cranking out, I think, weekly previews, recaps. It's been really good stuff for SEC baseball fans. Let everyone know where they can find you. Yeah,
first of all, Billy, I appreciate having you on. It's always a fun conversation. Just D1Baseball.com. Click the SEC Extra tab. If you haven't subscribed with us, now's the time to do so with Hoover. Let's call it 6 weeks away. Now's the time to do it. I would be humbled if you'd give us a shot. And then you can follow me on social media at Joe Healy D1.
Joe, appreciate it. Have a good one.
See you, Billy.
All right, that's Joe Healy from D1Baseball.com. Does a really, really good job alongside Mark Etheridge there with SEC Baseball Extra on D1Baseball.com. Go subscribe. It is well worth your time if you're a baseball fan, specifically a college baseball fan. And if you're a Vandy fan, you can read up on these other SEC teams. You can read up on Oklahoma ahead of this weekend. You can learn about Alabama and how good that team is this year, and Vanderbilt's trip to Oxford. You can learn about the Rebels. So really, really good stuff on SEC Extra. All right, that's what we've got this weekend. Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, big series. I like how Joe mentioned that this could separate these two teams in the standings later in the season. This could tell us who's hosting a regional at the end of the season. This could tell us a lot about both these teams. And Friday night's game is really important. Really important. Witherspoon on the mound for the Sooners. Thompson likely going for Vandy. It'll be 6 o'clock Friday night on the SEC Network. Number 19 Oklahoma, number 17 Vandy. That's one of the better matchups of the night and of the weekend. And then 3 o'clock on Saturday, that'll be on SEC Network Plus, and then 1 o'clock on Sunday on SEC Network Plus. I did want to make a note on the weather coming up this weekend in Norman, Oklahoma. It's not going to be 75 and sunny, but it's also not going to be, freezing cold like I think it was in the LSU Oklahoma series. It looks like Friday night the high is 77, the low is 51, sunny skies, so it should be pretty good weather for Friday. Sunny skies on Saturday. Winds could issue, I think, throughout the weekend. Some 20, 30 mile per hour winds on Saturday. But again, not going to be freezing. Now, as the night goes on, you could see some cooler temps. But should be a good weekend of baseball in Norman, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma. Again, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's a big series. And again, Witherspoon is the key for them. And Healy mentioned it, that they got to win the Witherspoon start. That's really what it's about for Oklahoma. And for Vanderbilt, just keep doing what you're doing. I think this is a rhythm that Vanderbilt's on right now, the way they're playing, the way they're executing offensively. So if they can keep that going, you'd imagine Vanderbilt at least could take one at the very worst. But best case scenario here, you take 2 out of 3. It's probably going to be hard to sweep this weekend. But if you can win Friday, you're setting yourself up very well for the weekend against Oklahoma. Baseball coming up this weekend, Vandy and Oklahoma. Again, basketball portal news. Could hear about Frankie Collins coming up shortly. I know there's some buzzing and chirping on the board about that. So we could have a commitment today from potentially Mr. Frankie Collins. We'll talk about that when it happens. I'm sure Joey and Brandon will have a reaction and plenty of coverage, but we'll see what happens. And spring game Saturday, 1 o'clock at First Bank Stadium. Go out and see the Vanderbilt football team in action. So that's what we've got this weekend. Busy weekend for Vanderbilt athletics. All right, that'll do it for another episode. This Thursday episode of Vandy 247 Live, brought to you by Sanders Moving. Log on to tedrsandersmoving.com. Big thanks to Joe Healy on our guest line, which was brought to you by John Levin, good friend of the show, Wobble Bond Dickinson. His company thanks to student athletes at Vanderbilt for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Also, Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. Subscribe to Vandy 247 YouTube channel. Like this video. Fire away your comments and your questions. And go subscribe, Vandy247.com. Thanks for listening.